Football didn't fail to stop Erling Haaland because it lacked ideas. It failed because every idea arrived too late. At first, defenders trusted timing, then they trusted distance, then they trusted caution, and one by one, those instincts collapsed. This isn't the story of goals or records or physical dominance. It's the story of the exact moment football realized that reacting was no longer enough, because by the time you adjust to him, the decision has already been made. For years, elite football lived by one assumption: order protects you. Compact lines, correct distances, no unnecessary risks. If you defended well, you were safe. That logic shaped everything: coaching manuals, recruitment profiles, match plans. Control wasn't about domination, it was about eliminating danger, and for a long time it worked. Then Erling Haaland arrived at the highest level, and something quietly stopped adding up. Teams weren't losing because they were reckless. They weren't being stretched. They weren't chasing shadows. They were losing while staying compact. Low blocks were intact. Center backs held their line. Fullbacks didn't jump early. Midfielders protected the half spaces instead of pressing blindly. From the touchline, it looked correct. Coaches could freeze the frame and justify every decision. Distances were right. The shape was intact. The structure was disciplined. We're fine. We're controlling this. We're defending well. And for long stretches, they were telling the truth. But control had changed its meaning. Against Haaland, defending well didn't need to collapse. It didn't need chaos. It didn't need repeated mistakes. It only needed one interruption. One defender choosing caution over contact. One line holding shape a fraction too long. One midfield screen hesitating before stepping forward. No panic, no desperation, just a single rupture, enough. That's what made it difficult to recognize, because nothing looked broken. The system didn't fail loudly, it failed quietly. Managers trusted structure, because structure had always been protection. They saw compactness and assumed security. They saw discipline and assumed control. But Haaland wasn't attacking disorder. He was attacking the moment where order becomes rigid, where defending well turns into defending passively, where control delays action instead of enabling it, and once that line was crossed, the match could still look stable right up until it was already gone. And when defending well stops protecting you, the problem is no longer about tactics, it's about what control actually means now. When Pep Guardiola signed Erling Haaland, the expectation was obvious, that the most controlling coach in modern football would try to control him, reduce the runs, bring him into combinations, smooth the chaos. Guardiola did none of that. He didn't ask Haaland to touch the ball more. He didn't demand constant involvement. He didn't try to turn him into a connector. At Manchester City, that was the decision. Guardiola accepted something he usually resists: disconnection. Haaland would disappear for minutes, sometimes entire phases. No dropping between lines, no overloads around the ball, and Guardiola was fine with it because he understood something earlier than everyone else. Limiting Haaland's movement meant limiting the problem he creates. This wasn't a false nine, not a positional reference, not a striker asked to organize others. Compared to Guardiola's previous forwards, the contrast was sharp. No Lionel Messi drifting to dictate rhythm. No Sergio Aguero living in short combinations. No hybrid solution. Haaland was allowed to be unused, and that freedom changed City's control. Possession no longer needed to dominate territory. Circulation didn't need to accelerate to create danger. The threat existed without the ball moving faster. Opponents couldn't press aggressively. They couldn't step high with confidence. They couldn't compress space the way Guardiola's teams usually invite. City gained control without possession dominance, control through restraint, control through the fear of one run that might never come. Guardiola didn't tame Haaland because taming him would have restored predictability, and predictability was the one thing he couldn't afford to give back. But while Guardiola could accept that freedom, the teams facing him couldn't. Not every defender was beaten by Erling Haaland. Some of them made a different choice. They chose not to risk. Against him, the margin for error shrank to almost nothing. One wrong step wasn't a lost duel, it was a goal. That's where the first blinks appeared. Under Jurgen Klopp, Virgil van Dijk built his dominance on anticipation, stepping early, killing danger before it formed, winning duels without sprinting. Against Haaland, that instinct shifted. Instead of stepping forward, Van Dijk delayed. Instead of compressing space, he protected depth. The priority changed from winning the duel to surviving the run. It wasn't hesitation born from doubt, it was calculation. The same pattern appeared in Europe. At Real Madrid, Antonio Rudiger, aggressive, physical, fearless, adjusted in a similar way. Less contact, more jockeying, more sideways positioning instead of frontal confrontation. Not because he couldn't duel, but because dueling Haaland at the wrong moment meant exposing everything behind him. Across leagues, the visual change was subtle but consistent. Fewer defenders stepping out of the line, more retreating while staying square. More emphasis on managing space than imposing authority. This wasn't weakness, it was risk management. Elite defenders weren't being defeated in battles, they were choosing which battles were no longer worth fighting. And once that choice was made, once anticipation gave way to caution, the balance shifted. Because football defenses survive on conviction, on stepping together, on believing the timing is right.
3-2! Bundled over the line, but that is a terrific move from City.
And once that calculation proved necessary, it didn't stay isolated. It spread league after league. On paper, their ideas couldn't be more different. Mikel Arteta believes in control through structure, precise spacing, rest defense always prepared, every risk accounted for before the ball moves. Against Erling Haaland, Arteta adjusted exactly as the model demands. Lines dropped a little earlier, the back four stayed connected. The midfield shield focused less on pressing and more on protecting space behind it. The structure held. The plan made sense. On the other side stood Jurgen Klopp, whose football is built on something else entirely. Intensity, height, winning the ball before danger can even exist. But even Klopp adapted. The line dropped. The gegenpress softened. The first reaction was no longer to attack the ball. It was to protect the run. Two opposite philosophies, two opposite instincts, same destination. In both cases, the system survived, the shapes stayed recognizable, the distances were mostly right. What didn't survive was timing. The step came half a second later. The press hesitated just long enough. The line waited instead of attacking space. Nothing collapsed dramatically, nothing looked tactically wrong, but the game was no longer being decided by ideas. It was being decided by hesitation. That's where both managers arrived at the same wall. Arteta couldn't structure conviction into a player's first step. Klopp couldn't press instinct back into existence once doubt appeared. The problem wasn't that the systems failed, it's that systems depend on humans to execute them at the exact moment required. And against Haaland, that moment became the hardest thing to trust. When radically different models fail in the same way, the problem isn't the system, it's something deeper than tactics. Domestic leagues still allow debate, context, style, sample size. Europe didn't. In the UEFA Champions League, the margins disappear. Every weakness is hunted. Every assumption is exposed. Against RB Leipzig, the setup was correct. Fast defenders, disciplined block, clear responsibilities. Leipzig didn't defend recklessly. They didn't overpress. They didn't lose their shape. For long stretches, they looked comfortable. And then it happened. Not through sustained pressure, not through overloads, through one rupture. One defender hesitating between stepping and dropping. One line holding shape just long enough to be punished by Erling Haaland's acceleration. That was enough. The same pattern appeared against Bayern Munich. An experienced line, players raised on Champions League nights, territorial control without panic. Bayern managed space well. They limited touches, they dictated phases, until structure met inevitability. Again, no collapse, no chaos, just a single moment where timing lost to fear. Across both ties, the conclusion became unavoidable. This wasn't about league quality, it wasn't about tactical naivety, it wasn't about defenders being not good enough. The best prepared teams in Europe were arriving at the same outcome. One rupture decides everything. Inside recruitment rooms and coaching offices, the conversation shifted. Not how do we stop him, but what does stopping even look like now? Because when elite structure fails under elite conditions, doubt stops being theoretical, it becomes accepted. That's the moment football didn't find the solution. It stopped believing one existed. At some point, matches stopped being played at their natural rhythm, not because teams wanted to dominate possession, not because they were chasing control through the ball, but because speed itself became dangerous. Against Erling Haaland, managers realized that acceleration, not space, was the real threat, so they tried to remove it. Build-up became cautious, circulation slowed, vertical passes were delayed or avoided entirely. The idea was simple: if the game never accelerates, the run never happens. Coaches like Pep Guardiola, Mikel Arteta, and Carlo Ancelotti all arrived at the same conclusion through different styles. Control the tempo, flatten the match, remove the moments where chaos can be triggered. On the surface, it worked. Games looked calmer, transitions were fewer, defensive lines weren't constantly tested, but the cost was hidden. By slowing the game, teams also slowed their own reactions. Pressing triggers arrived late. Defensive stepping became passive instead of assertive. The match entered long stretches of artificial calm. And Haaland thrives in contrast. He doesn't need a fast game, he needs a sudden one. 2 minutes of slow circulation, one vertical pass, one sprint when everyone else is walking. That snap from stillness to explosion became decisive. Teams weren't being stretched repeatedly, they were being surprised once. And that's what made it so hard to diagnose. Because the match looked under control, the rhythm looked managed, the danger felt postponed. Until it wasn't. By trying to control tempo, teams lost control of timing. They dictated how slow the game should be, but not when it would break open. And once matches started being played at the wrong speed, advantage shifted quietly. Not to the team with more possession, but to the player who could end stillness in a single stride. And when rhythm stops protecting you, the game starts slipping away long before the goal arrives. Football didn't collapse. That's what made it unsettling. The defensive lines were still there, the shapes still recognizable, the adjustments still coming from the bench. Nothing looked abandoned, but something fundamental had shifted. The first doubt started arriving earlier, not after a mistake, not after a goal, before either. Defenders hesitated sooner, midfields delayed decisions they once made instinctively. Pressing triggers softened before being tested. The game didn't break structurally, it broke mentally. Erling Haaland didn't destroy systems. Those systems still exist on whiteboards and training pitches. What he destroyed was trust and timing, the belief that stepping now is better than stepping later, that anticipation is safer than caution, that conviction protects more than distance. And without timing, football loses its anchors. No timing means no line. No line means no pressure. No pressure means no control. Everything becomes reactive. Every decision arrives half a second late. And at this level, half a second is the match. That's when the realization set in, not in a dressing room after a defeat, not in a post-match interview, not even on a Champions League night, but in the repetition, the same hesitation, the same delayed step, the same outcome, again and again. That's when football understood something it hadn't faced before. The problem wasn't that Haaland kept scoring. It was that the game no longer trusted itself against him. The moment football realized it was too late wasn't a goal. It was a doubt that arrived before anything even happened.